Okay, welcome to my talk on the Pomodoro Technique. Let's get started. And of course, this talk will be of the duration of 2 Pomodoros. Before explaining to you what this means, let me introduce myself. My name is Giorgio Sironi. I am an Italian developer, and I work at 1BIP, where much of the experience with the Pomodoro Technique in a team comes from. At 1BIP, we provide a service for micropayments, where you are able to pay directly with your SIM card or your DSL invoice without credit cards or accounts. And we do so from 2005. So when you hear mobile payment, it's not something, it's not a buzzword from today, it's something that we do for a long time. I'm sorry for my voice, I have a bit of a cold. I'll try to be as clear as possible. So, the goal of this talk is to decide if the Pomodoro Technique is something that fits you or not. So I will explain to you what are the goals that we pursue with this technique and how the constraints that the technique sets may help you reach them. The goal is not explaining particular tools like Pomodoro application or timers or deciding how to track your work into sheets or applications. It's just about the technique itself. There will be hook points for questions at the end of the first and of the second Pomodoro, so at half of the talk and at the end of it. And I will write some concepts on these slides in camel case, just because I cannot explain these concepts in full here, but they are something interesting that you may explore further with Google. If you see something in camel case, it's actually a well-known concept in the Agile community, and by Googling it, you will know more about it. But I cannot go into detail. I often perform similarities or metaphors between the Pomodoro Technique and Agile processes like Scrum or XP. When I use a metaphor, you will see it written with this cursive bluish font over the slides. So, I can explain to you what the Pomodoro Technique is in 60 seconds, but it will take the rest of this talk to find out why it is shaped like this. When you start doing Pomodoros, which is an Italian word for tomato, you work in 25-minute bursts. And these bursts of work are called Pomodoros because when they were measured for the first time, the kitchen timer used it at the shape of a Pomodoro. It could be the egg technique or the any other kind of fluid technique by now. So, in these periods of time, you work uninterrupted from external causes like colleagues asking you questions or answering mails. And due to this, you focus on a single task for the duration of the Pomodoro. You don't jump between implementing different things at the same time. After every 25-minute period, when the Pomodoro timer rings, you stop from an amount of time from some seconds to 5 minutes maximum, when you try to take a small break to get away your eyes from the screen. Why you take this break, it will be more clear during the talk. After some Pomodoros, you may take longer breaks like having lunch or having coffee or anything else. Usually 3, 4, 5 Pomodoros in a series. So, the goals we try to pursue with this technique are, first of all, focus, being able to stay on a single task for even a small amount of time, like 25 minutes. The second goal is to deal with interruptions, which are something that can disrupt your focus very easily. A phone always ringing is something that does not let you work in a very good way. But there are also minor goals like having a simple way to estimate tasks, how much long they take, and to schedule them during your day. And of course, since you're measuring how many Pomodoros it takes to complete something, to complete a class or a feature, you can then improve your efficiency by comparing previous features with new ones and seeing if it takes you longer or shorter to finish them. So in the first Pomodoro of this talk, we'll talk about focus and much of how to deal with interruptions and about the other goals in the next one. Focus means that we don't want to do multitasking at all when we're working with Pomodoros. The problem with multitasking is, first of all, context switches, the cost that it takes you to switch from one task to another and regain concentration. But we'll talk about context switches later with interruptions. Even if it were costless to switch between task A and task B, multitasking will still be something that we would want to avoid. And it is because of the lead time of the tasks that you perform while working serially versus working in parallel. By lead time, I mean the time that it takes for one of these tasks, A, B, and C, for example, to be finished. While you're working serially, if you tackle one task at a time, you will have the first and the second available and finished, so live on your website, for example, in the shortest amount of time possible. With multitasking, usually you work on many things at the same time, and no task gets finished until a longer period of time, like, for example, 2 days in this case. While tackling tasks serially, the first task is finished as soon as possible, the other has to wait. But at least you're not juggling many things and never get anything done until your budget finishes or your iteration finishes or your 6-month development period finishes. This should remind you of some Scrum concepts like the sprint backlog. While you're working during a sprint, the scope of what you're developing is fixed. There are some stories in the backlog. This cannot be touched until the 2 or 4 weeks iteration is finished. So you can't juggle between too many features in a sprint in Scrum because your backlog is fixed. Kanban, in the same way, puts some hard limits on the amount of work in progress that you have. So if you have a development column on your board, you have a fixed number at not more than 3 or 4 stories or 5, depending on the size of your team. Not more of this number of stories can be developed at the same time. So the Pomodoro Technique tries to apply the same concept, but to 25 minutes period. So your backlog won't be a team-wide backlog, but will be a personal backlog containing the tasks that you have to perform during the day, like finishing a set of classes or their tests, or getting a feature live, or performing manual tests in QA. So what we try to do with the Pomodoro Technique is defining one goal for the current Pomodoro. In this case, for me, it is explaining to you focus and part of the interruption section. And try to stick with this without any interruptions. This is, of course, simple during a talk like this. We are very focused on a single activity. It is not easy when interruptions come in. It is an easy way to focus on a single task. You just have to pick up a timer, either mechanical or an app on your smartphone. And it leads you to many small successes during the day, because in the multitasking case, you're never finishing anything until you get to the end of your time period. With the Pomodoro Technique, ideally every time you finish a Pomodoro, you have accomplished something. So you have many small successes during the day, even in the morning, you get something done and then pass to something else. You don't juggle many things at the same time, leaving the risky part for later. While focus is important, it is not easy to maintain it unless we do something to deal with our interruptions. So the problem with interruption is the cost of context switches, which is the amount of resources like time or concentration that it takes you to go from one task to another. For example, to switch between coding, answering urgent mails, and coming back to coding. We have the two context switchings in this case. The term context switch is actually technical because our machines do it all the time. But our machines usually bear the cost with no problem. Even when they have a single core, they switch many hundreds of processes. They do not execute, of course, these processes at the same time on a single core, but every few microseconds, a process is taken away from the processor, put to rest, and another ready process is put in by the scheduler. There is a cost associated to this even with machines. For example, the registers of the CPU have to be saved, and some pages have to be swapped to disk or to RAM, depending on what process you're working in. So we can deal with this by adding RAM to our machines, but we cannot add RAM to our brains, so we have to think about something else. Minimizing the context switches instead of minimizing their cost, because their cost is fixed, and I've never known people able to switching seamlessly between different tasks. There is always a hidden cost involved. There are many kinds of interruptions that make you perform a context switch. Some are externals, like a colleague asking you a question or your boss wanting a status update, or mails that are notified to you by the operating system and that have to be answered immediately or maybe not. And phone calls, which are a very synchronous way of communication, where you are conditioned by our culture to leave down anything you're doing and pick up the phone, even if it's just someone trying to selling you some contract. There are also internal interruptions, which do not come from external events, but from the way we work. For example, we may want to refactor unrelated classes with respect to the ones we're working on. We may keep in mind things to do because we are not able to track them on some external tools. So while coding, having to remember to deploy something in production, which is very urgent. Or even interruptions that make us look for distractions like tweeting all day. If you tweet during your Pomodoro, it is a problem. So in any case, these interruptions are not beneficial for us because as developers we are usually on what Paul Graham calls the maker's schedule. The schedule of the creative people, which has to tackle difficult things, so he requires concentration, and he can work on these things alone for a certain period of time without problems. One schedule which is opposite to the maker's one is called the manager schedule. It is not manager just in the hierarchical sense, because even a product owner or a scrum master which is going from person to person during the day is on the manager schedule. This kind of schedule is made of communicating with other people, in removing impediments, and is not something that you want to... the Pomodoro technique is not something you want to use in the manager schedule. But when, as developers, we are on a maker's schedule, long periods of focused time to solve difficult problems, then we can benefit from the Pomodoro technique and try to avoid being disrupted by the other members of the team which are on the manager schedule. Other members of the team are necessary and their work is useful. We just don't have to impact on each other. In fact, what I can say you is that interruptions like this cannot be eliminated. It is normal from your boss to ask a status update from you, or it is normal from your colleagues to asking questions during the day. These kind of interruptions are also unexpected by definition. If you have a stand-up meeting at 9:30 every morning like us, this is not an interruption, It is something you can plan for. So if you're starting a Pomodoro a quarter of an hour before your stand-up meeting, you cannot complain that you're being interrupted. But we can do something from the unexpected interruptions which cannot be eliminated from our work. It is important to answer your colleagues' questions. We just have to set up our work in a way that let us work in some periods of time which are uninterrupted. So during the Pomodoro technique, during a Pomodoro, we try to use this small routine which is called the inform, negotiate, callback. When someone like a colleague asking you questions comes to you, you inform him that you're working in a Pomodoro. You negotiate with him that you will get back to him in 10 minutes, which is the amount of time that it takes for the Pomodoro to finish in this case. And there is a callback in the sense that you will be the one that will go to your colleague and answer his question. Usually, anyone can wait for a period that in the worst case is 25 minutes, if you have just started your Pomodoros. On average, an external person asking you something or wanting you to work on something else, on average, he will wait for 12 minutes because it is half a Pomodoro, so it's the expected value of this amount of time. When you deal with interruptions like this, it only takes some seconds for you to negotiate the interruptions and postpone it at the end of the Pomodoro, and you add it to your personal backlog, to the things you have to do today. But you don't interrupt your current focus in these 25 minutes. If there is an unended interruptions, you must make the Pomodoro ring, so you will take it up to 0 and make it ring because you were not able to handle these things. It is fine in certain cases. If you have an emergency on production, you should definitely make your Pomodoros ring and just work on that immediately. But if you always cry wolf, you know the saying, then when there is a real emergency, people will be complaining that you're interrupting them. So you should void your Pomodoros carefully, only for real emergencies, and negotiate anything else. These kind of interruptions are then moved at the end of the Pomodoro if they are really quick, like answering a question, or they can be grouped to a specialized Pomodoros. I do this for mails, so I don't even open my mail account in the morning. I just bundle everything that I will have to do with mails for a specialized Pomodoro at half during the day, like afternoon or the last Pomodoro before lunch. And in this Pomodoro, I will answer all the mails and get to inbox 0, no unread items. But I won't answer mails even between Pomodoros for the rest of the day, because since it takes a long time to answer all of them, I will make breaks which are not 5 minutes or 1 minute long, but 20 minutes. So it's best to dedicate a specialized Pomodoro just to all these interruptions and work on coding and on providing value, testing, deploying, QAing, and so on for the rest of the day. Of course, if you're on the maker's schedule. This may remind you of Backlog Works, because if you're doing Scrum or XP and someone comes to the product owner and he says to him, I want this new feature, you won't interrupt what the team is currently doing, but you will add this new feature or this new idea to the product backlog. After the current sprint finishes, so on average 1 week, in the worst case 2 weeks, work will be reprioritized, and this feature can be inserted in the next sprint backlog. But you don't interrupt the team every day by changing what they're working on. For the duration of the sprint, they're working on it. So for the duration of the Pomodoro, 12 minutes on average, you will work on what you have chosen. It is very easy to use the Pomodoro technique if you are a freelancer. It is not the same when working in a team. A small solution that scales up to one pair, then another person, or 2 pairs, is to do a collective Pomodoro. So you use a single timer for 2, 3, or 4 person. This scales only up to this number because afterwards it becomes very difficult to synchronize the work of everyone in a team. So different pairs or different people use their own Pomodoros. But in some cases, you can use a Pomodoro for the whole team when the members are focused on the same activity. For example, during a retrospective meeting or during a stand-up meeting. In this case, it's not a Pomodoro because it's not 25 minutes and the patent on the Pomodoro Technique says 25 minutes. But a stand-up meeting is usually time-boxed to a duration which is even shorter than a Pomodoro, like a quarter of an hour in the worst case. In this case, you use a single timer for all of the people. I'm sorry, this image is not very clear on the screen. It was much better on the laptop. But a big problem you have while working with this technique is that emergency comes in for the team to be dealt with. We have an online payment service that has been run for several years. So every day there is an emergency. For example, we integrate with hundreds of different carriers, Vodafone and many others. So if on average once a year one of them changes something, for us it's every day a different operator is changing something, and there is an emergency like we will be shutting you down if you don't adapt your integration with us. So we have created a special this is our board, and we have created a special swim lane, which is called ER, Emergency Room, where we put people to work in this emergency room. Actually, it is not a real room, but just a swim lane. And we put people in it by rotation, so each week the people working in ER change. These members of the team are responsible for dealing with any emergency that comes from the live website or from something external to the team. The other swim lanes are dedicated to the current features in development, so that the Pomodoros and the stories that the rest of the team is working on are not interrupted. The people in ER are on the manager's schedule for the duration of the week, and if they work with Pomodoro, they will be continuously interrupted, and that is normal. But at least if we put 2 people in ER, we save the time of the other 8 people in the team that are working on normal development. So I do deal with emergencies if someone wants to void your Pomodoro every time. You create an ER section and put some people by rotating them, because it's something that pisses off developers, so you have to rotate them periodically. And they will shield the rest of the team from these interruptions. This is the best you can do. Of course, if you have a better solution, I will be glad to hear it. When working in a team, pay attention to not impose this technique on people that do not want to work with timeboxing. Half of my team uses Pomodoro for all of its work. We use it collectively in meetings, so everyone is doing a Pomodoro in that case. But if someone wants to work without timeboxing when he's alone or in a pair, don't impose it on him. It's not something that can be mandated from outside. It should be a choice of the single person on how he wants to be more productive. So we have finished with a little bit of anticipation the chapter on interruptions. So in the next Pomodoro, we will talk about estimation. Since the Pomodoro is about to ring, I won't enter immediately in detail, but it is perfectly fine to estimate things in Pomodoros if they are of the correct size. We will see that you can estimate tasks taking from 1, 2, 3, 4 Pomodoros up to maybe 10 or 13. but it becomes more difficult as you get to larger numbers. So what we estimate tasks, not stories, so smaller scope, and we do this in Pomodoros. So we have get to the end of the first Pomodoro, so if you have immediate feedback, you can tell me right now, and then we will start the second one. Like, is everyone hearing? Is my voice okay, because I have quite an Italian accent? Are there some problems? Is it okay for everyone else? Okay, so we start the second one. If I had to answer a phone call, maybe, but it's not a problem. So, second Pomodoro, we will talk about estimation, efficiency, and scheduling. The most important part of Pomodoros, I think, is focus and interruptions. But these are nice things that comes for free as a byproduct of using the Pomodoro technique. So, we estimate tasks in Pomodoros, usually with a number which is a few integers, from 1 to 8, 13. We don't estimate things that are smaller than that in Pomodoros, because there is much variance in this estimation. So if you're estimating something as half a Pomodoro, it is actually the duration of this task is a random variable that will take in reality from 0.1 to 2 Pomodoros. So if you're estimating something so precisely as half a Pomodoro, it won't be very good, because the error that you will make on that estimation will be bigger than the estimation itself. So when you have very small tasks, don't use splitted Pomodoros. Just bundle the tasks up, like we do with mail, for example, and estimate this bundle of many similar tasks in a single time. So I dedicate one Pomodoro to answer mails, and I don't estimate how much it takes to answer a single mail. And in the same way, you should not estimate tasks that are too large, and even when you are forced to do it, you should use a scale that does not give you a false sense of precision, like the Fibonacci scale, which is famous for the estimation of stories when you do estimation in story points. So when you get to bigger stories, or in our case to bigger tasks, you have to increase the interval between the points available for your estimation. In our case, it is a number of Pomodoros. So I may say that this task will take me 8 Pomodoros, or 14 or 20, but I won't go into the detail by saying it's taking me 13, 15 or 16 Pomodoros, because again, it's the first sense of precision. There is a variance in this estimation, so an error that you will make with respect to the real duration, and this error will naturally go up when the task grows. So using these increasing intervals in your scale lets you make realistic estimations. So it's 13 plus minus 2 free Pomodoros, not 13. So when you estimate in Pomodoros, you have an easy way to benchmark what you're doing and measure how much time it really took for you to take this feature from inception to live on your website and tested. Without the Pomodoro technique, it is a bit more difficult, because you cannot easily assign the time that you have spent during the day to tasks, because you work for a little bit on something. You may get interrupted, and then the time for answering that phone calls should be counted in the tasks or not. If you do not track time, you cannot assign this time to the task that you have performed. With Pomodoros, you are forced to do a single task for the duration of a time unit, so it's very easy to then assign Pomodoros to what you have worked on, even if during a day you have switched between different tasks, but only between Pomodoros. This is not as precise as measuring velocity, which is a better measure of productivity for the team that will serve you well at a bigger scale, because recording Pomodoros is estimating effort. With velocity instead, you record the value, the amount of story points that you completed in a single iteration. So in our case, for example, if we're waiting for a month for an external entity like a mobile carrier to answering us, this is not counted in the Pomodoros. But if you track velocity, you will see that the feature is not going live and is not providing us money. So velocity will find out these problems. Benchmarking effort with Pomodoros won't. So it's not as a powerful benchmark as we would want it to be. Moreover, working in Pomodoros lowers a bit the risk of what you're doing. Working in iterations lowers the risk that if you're doing something wrong, you will only lose the current 2 weeks. So even if you're started on the completely wrong path and you have to throw away all of your code at the end of your Pomodoros, you have just lost the last 25 minutes. So you can restart without problems. I have seen many wild goose chases when people worked on fixing a bug for several hours, even me. So I'm the first to commit this error when working without Pomodoros. And in this case, you lose much time chasing a bug, trying to fix this, or trying to shoehorn new things into your design, while the Pomodoro rings after 25 minutes and it reminds you that you have just lost a unit of your time on this wrong road. It is better, in my opinion, than finding out after 3 hours that much time has passed and you haven't accomplished anything. And we'll talk shortly about this in our section on efficiency. The Pomodoro tries to improve your efficiency in performing tasks like coding, which is our main task, I think. It does so in several different ways. The first is by taking advantage of Parkinson's law. This law, actually an heuristic, I wouldn't call it a law of nature, tells us that work expands to fill the time that you have set available for its completion. So if you say, well, I have the whole day to complete this feature, our subconscious, I think, will make sure that we take the whole day to finish this. The Pomodoros create an artificial deadline, much similar to the timeboxing of sprints or XP iterations, where this artificial deadline tries to force you to ship something usable at the end of each Pomodoro or each iteration, and the end of each day at a bigger scale. It is, however, very stressful to work with real deadlines every day. So no one will beat you if you do not finish your task in time for your for the Pomodoros you have allocated to it. It's something that happens, and it is meant to improve our estimation capabilities. But at least these artificial deadlines make us more productive, because we cannot go on these bug chasing activities, but we stay focused, because every 25 minutes this timer rings and tells you, have you accomplished something or not? So this is much similar to the way in which Scrum teams must demo something at the end of each iteration. You don't have to demo something at the end of each Pomodoro, but at least, for example, your new acceptance test should be passing at the end of each Pomodoro. If you're taking longer than a Pomodoro to make a test pass, maybe you have to revise something in your design. Another way in which the Pomodoro tries to increase your productivity is by forcing some small breaks. I know that some of us wants to work in what is called the zone or the flow experience, and we'll talk about that shortly. But small breaks, even when you just take your eyes off the screen, are very beneficial. If not for the rest that they give you, for the feedback that they give you that time is passing. And we will explain this in this subsection, which is dedicated to flow and to the people who say the Pomodoros interrupt my flow, and once I am interrupted, I cannot regain my concentration. So the flow is this psychological state when we are fully involved in an activity. Usually it happens to us while coding. And if we are taken away from this activity, it can take quite an amount of effort to come back in this zone or in this flow and resume what we were working on. But since we have said that interruptions cannot be eliminated, we don't really have the choice between working in flow or working with Pomodoros. Our real choice in my team at least, and I don't know if you can be shielded from interruptions all day, usually the choice is between working in the flow and being interrupted every time someone else decided to do so randomly, or working with Pomodoros, so working in periods of time of 25 minutes which are guaranteed to be uninterrupted, and having fixed interruptions where you can deal with external things and emergencies and everything else at the end of each Pomodoro. By the way, I'm not a fan, surprisingly, of working in flow, because usually from how it is defined in psychology, in sociology, you do not feel time is passing while you're in the flow. So you dive into a task and you come up from it 3 hours later with some code in hand, which may or may not be the most effective solution that you could find. For example, it is common to enter into death marches when you start to refactor things or to find the root cause of a bug and spend 3 hours to get the perfect design that will prevent all of these bugs in the future, but reaching this perfect design on a feature that will be thrown away in 2 weeks. So what I want to avoid is to working for long periods of time in flow while I'm working on the wrong thing. It's the difference between being efficient and being effective. The Pomodoro Technique does not tell you to work in these long periods of time, but it tells you to reevaluate what are your priorities and if your design is good enough after each half an hour, so when the timer rings. It prevents these dead marches when you have like 10 terminals opened and you're seeing logs from all kinds of your production servers, and you're finding every bit of what has gone wrong with the bug and refactoring several different classes at the same time, while maybe there are other emergencies to fix or other features to work on that will bring you more money. So the real sense I get from the Pomodoro timer ringing is not that of forcing you to take a break and stay away from your screen. That is a nice side effect. But the real useful thing of this forced break is that they give you feedback. And if you had set up 1 hour, so 2 Pomodoros to fix a bug, you won't go into a death march in which you spend 3 hours refactoring that code to fix this bug. You allocate some time, you spend it, the Pomodoro gives you the feedback that that time is finished. While working in the flow, it's not easy to keep track of time because by definition you do not feel time and you are fully immersed in this task. This is my opinion, of course. If you want to work in the flow, you should not choose the Pomodoro technique to do so. It's different ways of working. With this technique, we value more to being able to change our priorities frequently than to reach the maximum efficiency and the flow in each thing we work on. The last way in which the Pomodoro helps you improve your efficiency is by giving you a simple way of benchmark, of course, like we see in estimation. The tricky thing is to include everything in your Pomodoros. So what happens usually with stories is that people use their stories. People estimate the amount of time it takes to code them, but not the amounts of time that it takes to write tests or to put in this feature in production or to monitor that it is working correctly. The same goes for Pomodoros. So we may have time suckers that makes us less productive, but unless we include them in our Pomodoros, we are not able to see, while measuring our effort, that these things are taking time away from us. So for example, I include the time that it takes for my physical and virtual machine to boot up in my Pomodoros, because otherwise, if this is an activity that takes much time, I won't be pushed to optimize it, because while looking at my sheets and my backlog, I will only see the coding activity measured in Pomodoros and not these phantom tasks that takes you time but are not measured. So anything should go into a Pomodoros if it is required for completing your task. From analysis to coding to testing to deploying on production and waiting for the build to finish and performing monitoring of the feature once it is live. Everything should go into that if you want to have a real assessment of how much time it took and to try to improve and shorten this time. So these are ways that we try to improve our efficiency with the Pomodoro technique. The last goal of the technique is providing an easy way to schedule your day. This is an example of one of my schedules. Just very simple, because I wrote the tasks I was doing on another sheet of paper. I had some hours of the day. The squares, of course, are Pomodoros. You see there are some completed Pomodoros with a cross, and a void one with a single line at the top. A void Pomodoro because I had to answer an urgent message during that Pomodoro, so I had to make it ring, and at the end of the day I saw that I have completed these Pomodoros and that some emergencies came up, and maybe in the future I will be able to deal with these emergencies more effectively. But I track the fact that I have void a single Pomodoro. You see also some Pomodoros which are planned at 4 p.m. And these were not actually done, just planned because another emergency came in. So even when I had a pretty bad interruption and other tasks coming up that were not made me not able to complete my Pomodoros, I still can be proud at the end of the day of the tasks that they have completed, and so in this case of 4, 7, 10, 11 Pomodoros, which is usually a very good amount of Pomodoros during a day. And of course, you may get fewer Pomodoros done or more. It depends on how much interruptions, how much different things you have to do on the day. Usually we estimate an ideal day as 12 Pomodoros. So you will never be able to complete 16 Pomodoros, which is the 8-hour workday. It is normal. You have to communicate with other people. Breaks sometimes takes longer. But a number of Pomodoros which approaches 12 is, I think, very good. Unless you're working as a freelancer. Then you can do even 20 Pomodoros in a day, because as a freelancer, no one is calling you. you're communicating with other people in very precise periods of time. By the way, if you're a freelancer, the Pomodoro helps you stop some procrastination, because you can usually have daunting tasks like compiling your taxes, which are part of the business. And you can start by doing, I will just work for 25 minutes on the task. Usually, after the Pomodoro rings, you get the energy to say, well, I maybe should do some more Pomodoros on this thing and complete it, because I am in the right state of mind. Just saying I will just do a Pomodoro is something, it's a trick that can help your mind to get started when you just need to get started and then get the momentum. So these were the 5 goals of the Pomodoro Technique. Actually, if you search in the Pomodoro Technique book, you will find these same goals. Focus, so working on a single task at a time and dedicating all of our attention to this task, being it coding or testing or anything else. Dealing with interruptions in order not to interrupt, in order not to lose our focus. So you can move interruptions, you can plan them at special times in a day. There are many there you can institute an ER swim lane on your board. There are many things you can do to avoid interruptions impacting on focus. The third goal is estimation. It is easy to estimate in Pomodoros, and you find out in a day if you were wrong or correct about your estimation. Improve your efficiency by creating artificial deadlines and some other tricks for your mind, and having a simple way for scheduling your day, where you just write on a sheet of paper some little squares. So, with these goals in mind, you now know why the constraints of the Pomodoro Technique, 25 minutes of uninterrupted work on a single task, are important in order to achieve these goals. If you don't have these goals in mind, of course, you shouldn't use the technique. But I have a word of caution, a final word of caution. You shouldn't use this technique in many cases. For example, free time, no Pomodoro Technique, of course. Even leisure tasks, like watching a movie, no Pomodoro, of course. Leisure tasks and even reading a technical book will be a leisure task for some of us, shouldn't use the Pomodoro Technique. It's something that you're doing for pleasure. You should not create these artificial deadlines and trying to get more efficient and reading a book. Even a type book, I would say. Of course, on fiction books, because they are part of free times. Moreover, when you have less than 25 minutes available, it makes no sense to start a Pomodoro. So if you have your planned stand-up meeting, just work on something for that quarter of an hour before your stand-up meeting. Do not start a Pomodoro. If you will leaving work in 10 minutes, no Pomodoro, in the same way. You are able to be interrupted every 25 minutes, okay, but if you have no amount of time longer than 25 minutes, it makes no sense to organize time like this. And of course, you shouldn't use the Pomodoro Technique if you are in the manager schedule. This means you're a manager, so your work is composed of interacting other people. I'm not saying this in the wrong way. It's just part of their job to communicate with other people and to take decision from another perspective. You shouldn't. You have a manager schedule even if you are a product owner, I think, because you're shielding the team from external interruptions like the customer calling. You're on the manager schedule, I would say, even if you are the kind of person which removes obstacles for your team, so you're going from desk to desk, helping people in setting up tests or the build on their machines. I think this is still manager schedule, even if you are a developer. So you shouldn't use the Pomodoro technique if you are in this schedule or in those particular days where you are on this manager schedule, while in the remaining days of the week, when you are coding, it is very natural to pick up your Pomodoro timer and isolate yourself for a bit. There is more to the Pomodoro technique to this presentation. For example, you could read the free Pomodoro Technique book. It's like 30 pages, so it's like a long article on the internet. If you want to know more about the Agile concept that I cited, they are all documented in a book which I think is a Bible, Mike Cohn's Agile Estimating and Planning, which teaches everything from story point to estimation to release planning to everything you want to know about working in Scrum. And you will see many parallels between, again, the Pomodoro technique and these concepts. So our 2 Pomodoros are finished, so I crave your feedback and questions if you have, and I thank you for your attention.